And good afternoon. Welcome everyone to a chat with author Laurie Frankel. I'm Nancy Stohs. I'm a co-chair of the Planning Committee for Wauwatosa's All City Read, which is an initiative of the Wauwatosa Neighborhood Association Council. Before we begin this event, I want to remind everyone that this is a Zoom webinar, which means you can see and hear us, but we can't see or hear you. If you have questions during the presentation, click the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen and type in your question. We'll have some questions from you at the end of the presentation. If you have any technical difficulties during the presentation, leave the presentation and close Zoom, and then reopen the webinar with the same login link you used the first time. Finally, this presentation is being recorded, so you can rewatch it if you missed anything, or if you want to share it with others. A link to the recording will be on our Facebook page, and so there you go. And now it's my pleasure to introduce our masterpiece sponsor of the read, Beth Jaworski of Shore West Realtors. Welcome, Beth.
Oh, thank you, Nancy. It is my honor to sponsor such a great community. I hesitate to call it an event because you guys put together, what, 6-7 weeks worth of events. And so I just want to say again, a huge thank you to the committee. Laurie, the author that we're about to hear, also echoed my thoughts that it is an amazing job you ladies do putting these events together. And we are so thankful and grateful and lucky in Wauwatosa to have you doing this. So thank you. And thank you, Laurie, for joining us.
We're lucky for your support. Thank you very much for that. We're so pleased to have with us today the author of this year's book, 1, 2, 3, Laurie Frankel, who is joining us from a hotel in Nashville. It's work related. Laurie is the New York Times bestselling award-winning author of 4 novels. Her writing has appeared in publications like the New York Times, The Guardian, Publishers Weekly, People Magazine, and more. She's a recipient of the Washington State Book Award and the Endeavor Award. Her novels have been translated into more than 25 languages and been optioned for film and TV. A former college professor, she now writes full-time in Seattle, where she lives with her family, and she says makes really good soup. So, welcome, Laurie.
Thank you. Thank you. I always forget. In fact, it's not me. I mean, I do make good soup, but and I probably said it at some point, but it is my publisher who puts that in there. And I never remember until people introduce me. And I think, oh, yes, I forget that that's in there. And I do make good soup, though what it has to do with writing books, I could not tell you.
No. Okay. There are several themes that run through this book. There's, of course, the environmental theme, the contamination of the town's water supply. There's the theme of living with disabilities, what that's like for people. Family's another theme, community, and I'm sure we could identify others. Which of those themes was the impetus for you to write this novel?
That's such a good question. And in some ways, I feel like the answer is all of them all at once. I think it was kicked off for me by thinking about the environmental piece, certainly. And I read an article in the New York Times Magazine in January of 2016 about a town in West Virginia downstream from a chemical plant that had polluting their water, and the class action lawsuit that the town was engaged in, and the lawyer who had been representing them for 2.5 decades. And I read this and I could not stop thinking about it. And which is the kind of thing that eventually starts being something that I start to think about writing about, I suppose. And in this case, I decided, like, okay, I need to learn more. I need to research this. And as soon as I started researching it, I mean, the first thing I found was that it took nothing more than picking up a newspaper every day to do that research. But what all of these articles say is long-term health consequences. But, you know, it's a newspaper article. It's not talking about long-term. It's talking about things that happened 24 hours ago. So when I started to think about what does long-term look like? What do long-term health consequences look like? then I'm starting to think about characters. And that is the point at which all of those other themes become a part of it. So as soon as it stopped being something that I was reading about and started being something that I was writing about, I think all of those themes are like part and parcel. They all kind of happen together at once.
Okay.
I think.
Why did you choose to tell the story through the eyes of teenage triplets, and why girls?
Yeah. So those long-term health consequences, therefore had to be long-term. So I picked the start date and moved it out, basically. Like, therefore they were 16 years old. The window for that was fairly small, as far as that goes. It was very interesting. So I think siblings are always really interesting to write about and to read about, because not always, but usually they share genetics, and not always, but usually they share all of the environmental stuff too. They are both nature and nurture. For the most part, they are raised in the same house by the same people, they go to the same school, they have the same community, and yet generally siblings are wildly different from one another. What I'm always saying is that I love my sister. I mean, I love her. But if I were dating her, I would definitely break up with her. And and I think that and I'm not alone in that. Among other things, it's probably mutual, certainly. But I think that a lot of people wouldn't date their sisters, which is a positive, net positive for sure. But therefore siblings are really interesting to write about. And in this case in particular, where you're looking at the impact of something environmental like this, and the answer is sometimes and maybe. And so all of that seemed really interesting to me going in. Triplets allowed me to do a range, and I think that's also very interesting. And so I went in with that idea, and wanted to look at that spectrum of things. And teenagers are really interesting because they exist in this very present tense. In this case, literally, and just as a life approach, there's not a lot of sense of the past, even when it has had this terrible of an effect and an impact, and not a lot of clear sense of the future. And that's a good place to tell a story from, and especially a story with as many voices as this had. If I could have done 5 kids, 6 kids, 8 kids, and not made the book 2,000 pages long, I would have. But at some point, you have to focus a little bit.
I have twin daughters, and there's no way they would marry each other either.
And there's no way they would marry.
They're identical twins,
which is really good, but also
so,
really interesting. Yeah.
Did you draw on your relationship with your sister in describing their relationship to each other?
That always fictional characters have this grounding in you and yours, in what you know and what you grew up with. So to some extent, certainly, I feel like I myself am pretty evenly split between the 3 of them, rather than having brought other people necessarily into those particular voices. But certainly that the nature of that relationship, where they're so close. I mean, they share a bedroom in a tiny house in a tiny town. And in many ways, their bodies overlap in addition to their brains and their minds and their emotions. And the way in which that brings you really, really close with someone. And it's a lot of love, but it's also a lot of rubbing up against each other. That definitely something that I know from having a sister myself.
Of the 3 of them, Mab, Monday, and Mirabelle, do you have a favorite? Is there one you feel the biggest connection to?
So as I say, I feel pretty evenly split between the 3 of them. I share with each of them something that allowed me, like a big thing, basically, that allowed me to write them. I think Monday was the most fun to write because her voice is so distinct. She's very funny, and she makes me laugh, and that's nice. She travels around with me because she's a good decision maker and I am not. And so I am often thinking, well, I'll have the yellow one of whatever it is, because she would, and that is a good and easy thing to do. It is Mirabelle who I think I worry about. She sort of sits on my heart in a way that characters don't usually, where now it's been years since I stopped writing her. I'm still like not so much thinking about her as worrying for her,
Really?
and her making her way in the world, which is interesting, certainly. And I think, Mab is sort of in every character. She's the every woman, every girl. And and so in that way, I think her feelings about being a high school student were very much my feelings about being a high school student.
This seems to be a book that required tons of research in order to write it in a convincing way. Or how did you prepare yourself to speak for someone with a disability? Did you talk to medical experts? Do you know someone with a disability? Do you run your writing by someone to see how real it was?
So yes, all of the above. Yeah, I did a ton of reading. I did a ton of research. I talked to a lot of people. I did talk to people who have disabilities very much like Maribel's. I've met a lot of people. I attended some conferences.
Wow.
All of the above. Yeah. It was an interesting, and I mean, in general, this book took a lot of research that I did and then kind of mentally threw away as much as possible. It was very important to me going in that these girls not be like per se diagnosable. I didn't want to say, she had this and this is what it looked like. Here's the label and here's what it means. I did not want that to be, not only did I not want to tell you, I didn't want you to be able to, I didn't want there to be an answer that I was just withholding. I didn't want it to be that nail downable. Similarly, I wanted to make sure that this town was not locatable, that I wasn't doing anything geographic to nail it to one part of the country, and certainly to one disaster, to one polluting company. All of that I read about and then took out all of the identifying details from the text over the course of revisions to make sure that it could be anywhere, but it could not be any one particular place per se.
Since you mentioned the town, where did you picture it in your mind? I mean,
so yes, I mean, as I say, I moved it all around, and I made sure that it could be moved all around, because when I did this research, some of the research was really specific. But as I say, some of the research is picking up a newspaper every morning, and this moves all over. It is all over the country. In fact, I couldn't find any place where it could not be. Any part of this country where I thought like, oh, that doesn't happen. That would never happen. For a while, the tagline we were using for this book is "We all live downstream." And that is basically true. And so it was really important to me that like this could be located really actually anywhere.
Is the name of the town Born? Is that because they've borne a lot of problems?
I mean, right. It works on a lot of different fronts, that name. Most of which weren't clear to me when I thought it up. They sort of became clear to me as it went on. It's interesting, for a while I was using it as the title, and it's a terrible title because you can't spell it, because or rather you can spell it so many different ways. But it certainly worked at a lot of different levels that I really appreciated, particularly in the audiobook, because because you can't tell how it's spelled.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
You would also, I would think, have to do a lot of research into the, pollution. I mean, you read newspaper articles, but did you also talk to scientists to find out what kinds of birth defects or cancers or whatever were realistically possible?
I did. Yeah, I did. And I did a lot of research into that. And one of the horrifying things is that a not insignificant amount of that research comes from the companies themselves, if you can get your hands on it. Where they're saying, we are manufacturing this product and here are the list of side effects. And yet we are continuing to manufacture this product anyway. So yeah, I did a lot of research, and a lot of it is crazy making. It's rage inducing. I spent a good bit of this project. This book took a fairly long time. This book took me like 3.5 years to write.
Oh, wow.
And in part it was because I spent a lot of days just like walking around my house raging, which is not really helpful to the creative process or really anything. But there's a lot to be quite angry about. And so yeah, I did a lot of research, and that research isn't even necessarily something that I recommend, because there's an extent to which there's not a lot you can do about a lot of these things. And, and so in some ways, is it better not to know? I don't know.
Ignorance is bliss, right?
Right.
So change topics a little. Mab and Petra have this ongoing banter around the SAT words.
Right.
Did you put that in the novel just for fun, or is there some other meaning behind it?
I mean, I put that in the novel because that's how I studied for the SATs myself.
Oh,
And because I think that there's this portion of high school for a lot of students that gets taken over by that particular obsession. It is interesting to me because I did study that way and I did grow up to do this, but I did not use any of those words between those two times. In the sort of course of day-to-day life, I think that's not how language works, which makes it an interesting thing to use as a barometer for higher education. I think all of that's getting phased out at the moment, which is also interesting. But the other thing is that in early drafts of this book, I revised this book 400 or 500 times, maybe. I cut 300,000 words from this thing. In early drafts of it, they all sounded like me. They sounded like an adult. And so I had to go back and take all of these really pretty sentences and make them sound less crafted and more like a teenager and less old. And so I sort of gave myself that vocabulary as a little present, like, okay, here's where you can use all of these big words that you did not know when you were 16. Have at it, but nowhere else. And so these are the little tricks one plays on oneself, I guess, when writing a book.
That was one thing I found interesting. I think a number of us who read the book did, that these are teenagers, but in a way they seem wise beyond their years, or they have these insights, and sometimes they're quoting what someone told them who is an adult. So that helps too. But that's why, to me at least, it did not feel like a YA novel, because so it was successful, your effort to
Thank you. Thank you.
Another kind of little fun element. Why did you choose to have the history teacher, Mrs. Schreiber, teach history in a helter-skelter, out of order way? That was fun too, but is there a bigger message in that?
Yeah, so much of the characters themselves and the characterization of the town came out of thinking about it. Came out of thinking, like, how would you teach history if you were living someplace where something this catastrophic had happened and you had stayed? How would the town look to the people who remained? It felt less like I made it up and more like I figured it out. And that feels to me true of her, that your sense of history would change if you were living somewhere where history had happened and not in the way that we think of it as happening. The fallout from it was different than purported, or different than reported. Like, we don't hear about what happens next. And it seemed to me that if you were a student of or teacher of history, that would really alter any sort of a sense of this thing happened and it led to this thing and it led to this thing and it led to this thing, which is how we always study history. It is, of course, also true that I am a novelist and I make things up for a living, and therefore I am pretty distrustful of history as it was handed down. I mean, I was very distrustful of it in high school and very distrustful of it in college, like in studying this stuff. Because when you put it together in a syllabus, I thought, well, okay, but that is also made up. That is also a version. It is a narrative, which I believe in absolutely, but it was being presented to me as true. Like, this is what actually happened. And I thought, so this is me fantasy lesson planning, basically.
Okay.
I taught for a lot of years, so I am always thinking about how to communicate the sort of thing to students, and that was certainly part of the answer to that question.
Okay. What did you teach?
English,
Of course.
yeah, of course, yeah. Shakespeare, gender studies, and literature and writing, also creative writing generally, playwriting, stuff like that.
Okay. How did you decide to make Nora a baking fanatic? Do you yourself like to bake?
So I as you say, I make good soup. I'm a good cook. I am a less good baker. And in many ways, for me, it is, I think, the same reason why it takes me 500 drafts and 300,000 cut words from a novel, because I'm just throwing stuff in a pot until it tastes good, rather than following an outline or a recipe, which is not my strong suit. So I am much more of a chef, of a cook, than I am a baker per se. Though, I can follow a recipe. This too, though, it bought me a lot of things. It was useful to talk about the ways in which you might go through your life if what you were trying to do was avoid water. And that was something I also researched by doing, looking at just how much bottled water I would need to get through a day if I were not using tap water at all. And it was a lot. And looking at how much bottled water just like goes into making a meal, and it is a lot. But baking, I realized, is something that you can do with melted butter, and as you said, cans of soda or pumpkin or whatever.
Milk or, yeah.
Right, lots and lots of ways to bake without water, which is very interesting versus cooking, where I just go through tons and tons of it. And so that seemed really, again, I it's less that I made that up and more that I discovered it along the way.
Okay. It also kind of, I think, it reinforced Nora's nurturing side.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. And baking is something you can control. If you follow a recipe, then it is likely to, not always, but it's likely to turn out. And that is really gratifying when everything else in your life is completely out of control.
Okay. What is the significance of Mirabelle falling in love with River? Was that to show that in spite of her severe disabilities, physical disabilities, she's still like any other teenage girl?
I mean, yeah, for sure. And not so much to like represent, well, how do I want to say that? Like it. So one of the things that I knew going into this book was that it all had to be fair, because they're 3 teenage girls, so they weren't going to stand for anything less than that. So that if it could not be that Mab and Monday get to go off and have adventures and love lives and friends and school, and Mirabelle just sits there telling us what her mother's thinking, silently, like a piece of furniture. That was not on the table ever, which is to say that, like, if 2 of them get to go out, they all get to go out. If somebody gets to have a friend, they all get to have a friend. If somebody gets to have something happen at school, they all get to have something at school. And the chapters are very parallel in that way. And that was really, really important to me going in. I mean, it seemed to me that I couldn't think of any reason why she wouldn't be in love with River. Of course she was in love with River. And I think that to the extent that, I think she makes a really good case for the inevitability of that. It did not seem possible to me for there to be any other answer there.
Okay. You've described this book as a superhero novel.
Yeah.
Was that in your mind when you began, or did it occur to you later as the characters came to life? And are the girls the only superheroes, or are there other superheroes in the book?
So I don't know. I don't know when this occurred to me, frankly. It's a good question. I don't know the answer to it. It feels like it was there all along, but maybe it came to me along the way. I do think that in general, girls are, I feel like my hope for the future is the kids coming up now. I just think that they are doing a really remarkable job with really, really difficult circumstances. It does strike me, and it did all along the way, and it does frequently enough, the girls superhero differently than the superhero stories that we are awash in. There's no shortage of superhero stories in culture at the moment. I mean, it's all of the movies and most of the television. I mean, it's everywhere. It's certainly no shortage of it. But it is this very male sensibility. And even when we get female superheroes, they they succeed by being very male, in this very very solo, very fast, very strong, very destructive of everything else, all of this like extra carnage, and who even cares about that? And I just think, I mean, that's not how anybody's superheroes. Like, obviously, we don't scale buildings with spider webs that we shoot out of our fingers or wrists or wherever the spider webs come from, but but that's especially not how girls superhero, because girls carry as they climb. They are very concerned about all of that collateral damage, and who else is being impacted, and how, and it isn't by being super strong, and it isn't by being super fast. It's something else, or at least like physical strength, this like, oh, I'm going to lift this car up, I am going to fly from this building, whatever. And so I wanted to talk about that, about this other way. These girls have to succeed on their own terms. It can't be by being the fastest and the strongest, and it also can't be by doing what their mother is doing. It has to be by figuring out their own way. They need each other. So it took me a long time to figure out what the ending of this book was, but I knew that it had to be that each of them brings something that only she can, that they do not succeed without each of those three pieces and working together. And those were the things that I wanted to talk about, but also the ways in which Nora's path, which is essentially legal, which is held out to us as, as our hope. Like, if you are wronged, it's okay because you will sue. Like, the legal system is there for you, and it isn't true. And so they have to figure out how to move on from that and what to do instead. And that is the superheroing that I wanted to talk about.
Since you bring up the ending,
Yes.
lots of people in book discussions have asked about the ending.
Yes.
So we think we're being told about their future, Mab's in
Yeah.
college, Mirabelle with her newspaper, and so on.
Right.
And then we're suddenly back on the bridge and
Right.
told maybe our story won't be exactly like that, but it will be something like that.
Yeah.
So what would you like a reader to believe, and why did you choose that kind of ending?
Not to torture people. I realize that it is a little bit torturous, and I wasn't doing it to be mean. I like, as a reader, slightly ambiguous endings. And as a writer, I almost always insist on them. I don't want to tell you I don't want to tell you everything. I don't want you to know everything. I don't want to just leave it abruptly. I don't want you to feel like you're wanting more. But I also don't want to tell you everything. In this case, I feel like you really want it. You want to know what happens next. You really, really, really want to know. And you want to know that they're okay. And you want to know that they, go forth and succeed. And you're in this place of like wish fulfillment. I think that so much of what they do, I mean, I can tell you that it's possible. I did a lot of research into demolition equipment as well. So it is possible. Is it likely? Probably not. And so, I sort of have you in this place of like, maybe, and you want it, and I want to give it to you, but also they're teenage girls. And so they don't know, and you can't either, what happens next. You have to exist in this place of hope, but not knowing for sure. And so that is the aim that I like to leave you with. On the other hand, I feel like if you want to believe that that's exactly what happens next, I say absolutely. That is what I believe happens next. So I empower you to feel that way about it.
Okay, thank you.
Sure, yeah.
I think we believed they destroyed the dam, but then it's the later stuff that, well, maybe.
Yeah, maybe. Exactly. Maybe.
Okay. So libraries are another theme in the book, and Monday is the consummate dedicated librarian in her unique way.
Yes.
Do you have fond memories of librarians helping you out along the way?
Yes, absolutely. Memories, and actually like memories from yesterday. I love libraries. I've always loved libraries. I grew up in one, like so many writers. I spent a lot of time in mine. Some of my earliest memories are in libraries. And then, and I sort of never gave them up. Over the pandemic, in Seattle, our libraries were closed for, I think it was a year and a half. Maybe it wasn't quite that long, but it was a really long time. And that was the longest, by far. I had not been in a library in my life. So I feel very strongly towards libraries. I mean, there's no place better as far as they have all of these books, but they also have people who can help you navigate the books. This is the sort of magic of librarians. I think that if you want a book by the same author, the last book that you liked, then you need an algorithm. If you want to go in and say to somebody, I really loved this book, I can't totally tell you why, that is the person who's going to be like, okay, let me recommend these other 6 books that an algorithm isn't even going to think of. This is why you need a librarian. And libraries also come with space in which to do this, in which to be warm, in which to be part of a community, in which to have support of a whole variety of varieties. I cannot say enough good things about libraries and librarians.
Okay. A few other questions from book discussions. In all the book discussions I've been in, the topic of Mab and River having unprotected sex has come up. Some people thought it was out of character for Mab, who seemed otherwise pretty sensible and driven to get out of Bourne and make something of herself. Why did you decide to include that in the story?
I mean, I think that the deal with Mab and River is exactly that. It's not so much out of character as we're just thinking, how could you possibly do this? And the answer is 16-year-old girl, of course she's going to do it. And that's exactly my point. With that whole escapade, I think that she believes that he is worthy, and Mirabelle even believes that he is worthy. And of course he isn't. Of course he's not. He's a 16-year-old boy. And I think that as readers, we know that. And as characters, they don't yet. Of course they don't, in part because they have led these very sheltered lives, and in part because they are 16. And and I just think that this is part of being 16, is making really stupid decisions about your love life. So yeah, and I think that River himself, he redeems himself a little bit at the end. But he is not the hero of the piece. He was never going to be the hero of the piece. And they have to learn how to do it without him. They think at first that he is the way forward, both for their particular problem and and for their souls or hearts or something like this. And he isn't. And that is something that I think there is no way to learn but the hard way. And there you go. She must.
Okay. Another question from the book club. Was there any hidden significance to the stained glass window in the library? Was there a clue in there? Or?
I mean, there are some clues in there. Yes, if you go back and reread the thing. I mean, mostly it allowed me to talk a little bit about that character who is otherwise sort of off screen, but really pivotal in giving us the hints that we need to figure this mystery out along the way if we are paying really, really close attention. I feel like the trick with mysteries is it's no fair if they come out of left field, if there's absolutely no way you could see it coming, but I also don't want you to see it coming. So it's got to be pretty well hidden. That is exactly what's going on there. It's to let us understand a little bit about that character and the names that she chooses and why, in order to bring us all of the information that we need, but hopefully not until I'm ready for you to have it.
Okay. Can you clarify the timeline of events? So triplets are born.
Yeah.
Husband, their father had died 6 weeks before, I think.
Right.
How long before that did the plant come to town? And at what point did it close? And did you have that all figured out? Or?
I did. And it's not that it's not a good question. And it's not that I don't have that in notes somewhere, but I'm not 100% sure I can remember it right now. It's been a really long time since I laid all that stuff out, because as I say, that was stuff I knew going in, and it took me 3.5 years to write this thing. And that was, so I handed this book in March of 2020.
Okay.
Yeah, right.
3 years ago.
Right. So which is why I remember it. So it's been a while. I think the answer is, I mean, so the idea was that it was 17 years since this stuff had gone down, and the girls are 16, so that they were drinking this water, in utero. And so I think it was in that year before before they were born. So like 3 months before they were conceived, and then, and then while they were gestating. I mean, I can tell you that I have this whole thing all mapped
Okay.
out, but boy, I don't think I can come up with it off the top of my
Okay.
head.
Okay.
It's a good question though. I mean, and it's a good question. And I know this because I obsessed over it for a really long time.
Okay. You mentioned before that you cut 300,000 words from the book.
Yeah.
So can you tell us a little more about that? About were there plot twists you took out, or was it, yeah.
Yeah. In my case, it is almost always stuff that is not working that I just don't know until I try it. So it is plot twists, but it's not plot twists from the plot that you read. It was other versions of things. It was different kinds of twists. It was different kinds of characterizations. It is typical for me to cut that percentage of words from a book, and almost always it's a sentence at a time, a paragraph at a time. It's not usually that I cut whole plot threads or twists or characters, though I do all of those things. But it is much more like I have tried something and it didn't work. It didn't go anywhere. It didn't buy me what I needed to. And so I have to go back and try something different. And then I'll figure out what works. And then I have to go back and fix all of the things that led you in a different direction, to make that ending pay off, basically.
Right.
And all of the things along the way, particularly in this one, because there's this mystery that is seeded throughout. And so all of those seeds I had to go back and plant. And in so doing, I had to take out a whole bunch of other stuff.
Okay.
Yeah.
You mentioned specifically you had to revise the dialogue of the girls, or their
Yeah.
narrative. Is
Right.
there any other specific thing you remember that you had to change?
I mean, there's so many things. So River, for instance, he's very into magic, and I needed that at a bunch of different points, but didn't realize that going in. So in early drafts, he was into photography. He had like an old manual camera with film, and he was really annoyed that there was no place to develop it. And and I made much of that. And he was always carrying it and taking pictures of stuff, and I thought that would be really useful. And there's a bunch of scenes in a dark room, and all of this stuff that just. It turned out, no, I needed to be like, I knew I needed to give him something. I needed him to be like a little bit geeky, and, and a little bit obsessed with something. And I, photography was a good guess. But then it turned out, I realized later, no, it's got to be magic. I need some magic. Here's how I'm going to get this key in here. Here's how I'm going to, and it's like I'm working backwards. Okay. So once I have that, then I need to sell this thing. And then all of that stuff had to get cut and replaced.
Interesting.
That sort of thing. Yeah.
Okay. Since the book was published, have you heard from people who have been similarly impacted in their towns by water or some other contamination?
Yes,
and what kind of insights have they shared with you?
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, yeah. This turns out to be, as I say, it is everywhere. It is everywhere, and which is not to say that it is not worse in some places than others, because it definitely is. But I have heard from lots of people, again, all over the country, who have said, in my town, it's not like this, but it's like this other thing. And I think that that's really, as I say, that was my intention, is to make the details change, but the kind of overriding thing be the same. Too, I've heard from a lot of people who are involved in lawsuits, and this is not a very lawsuit-friendly novel when you get right down to it. And I certainly don't mean to denigrate that. There's a lot of people doing really remarkable legal work on this front. But it is also, I find, frustrating the extent to which the difficulty in proving these cases is used as proof that it isn't a problem.
And so it sounds like you are you more attuned now to stories about, and so they leap out at you, and yeah.
Absolutely. Yes. Which I think is always true. Like, once you start paying attention to something, you see it everywhere. But yeah, I absolutely. And with really alarmingly little looking for it.
Mm-hmm. Has it also changed your outlook, or how you see people with disabilities and the problem of people with disabilities?
I mean, yeah, for sure. There too, it takes only, I think, looking for it, thinking about it, keeping your brain open to it. I mean, I also think um, it takes having a small child in the world at the moment. One of the questions that I was asking going into this book is, what does education look like if you don't need an official diagnosis? You don't need an IEP or a 504 to get what you
Mhm.
need as a student or as the parent of a student. What does medical care look like if you don't need an official diagnosis for your insurer in order to get the medical care you need? And this town born is beleaguered and abused in many, many, many ways. But in other ways, there's some really wonderful things about it. And and that is certainly one of them. And the other is it's pretty much it's universal design. They have these principles of universal design. The whole idea behind universal design is that it makes the community better for everyone. That curb cuts at intersections are great if you are trying to get up and down them in a wheelchair. They are also great if you are trying to get a stroller up and down them. They are great if you are trying to deliver packages. If you are not doing any of those things, if never in your life have you touched a wheel, it's fine. Like, you can walk down them. It's not hindering anyone. It's making lots and lots of people's lives better. And this is something that I think you don't necessarily think about if that is not how you are navigating the world. But there are lots and lots of opportunities that our communities can and should be taking to make the community stronger and work better for everyone. And it is something that I think about all the time, which is, what are the things that are making my life better, that are making someone else's life in my community worse? Or what are the things that could make someone's in my life in my community better without necessarily negatively impacting anyone? And I think that list is really long, and that we should be looking at it all the time.
Mhm. Okay. So it sounds like some of your books have been optioned for film or TV. Has anything
Right.
come of that?
Define anything.
Well,
Yeah, right. The Hollywood piece of this is always, of all of these books, is very, how do I want to say this? It's necessary for me to hold them at arm's length. It's very different than publishing. And so, whereas I feel like I live and die with the books, like as books, the Hollywood piece of it is, it's kind of fun to think about, but good to not get your heart set on, I find. They move at a different pace and in an emotionally different way, I guess, than does publishing, for better and for worse, I think. They're at the moment also like very backed up because you can't film anything with you're 6 feet away from anybody else. So they have this pandemic backlog that they're kind of working through at the moment. We'll see. It's very interesting. I mean, it's not that I wouldn't see it, but I think it would be a super weird experience. And so I don't necessarily have my heart set on it.
which of your books do you think would be, or would you like to see as on the screen?
That is a good question, to which I'm not sure I know the answer. It is very interesting because on the one hand, one wants to be involved because, like, these are my people, they feel like mine. And I certainly lived with them more and longer than anybody else. Because, it took me 3.5 years to write the book, which is a long time to be thinking about people all day, every day. And on the other hand, in some ways, I feel like I'm the last person to be involved in these adaptations or thinking about what they're going to look like on screen, because it can never look like the inside of my head.
Yeah.
And for me, they are characters in a novel. Like that novel is, I'm very much a novelist in this, very consummate way. And it isn't because I write novels that these characters exist in this form. It is sort of the other way around. I'm not sure I'm saying that right, but simply to say that their translation to the screen would be a really different thing and should be a really different thing. But I'm not sure I'm the person to make those decisions, which is interesting.
Okay. What would you like people to take away from the novel, this novel?
Yeah, I mean, all of those things that we talked about. Some of my question is, what is your dam? Like, what is the thing that exists in your life that does not seem to be something that you control, that actually you could just tear down yourself? What are the things that it feels like they're too big and too permanent and too baked in, that you actually could change if you thought about it that way? So that is some of it. Some of it too is what is the stuff that is handed down to you that you want to keep, and what is the stuff that is handed down to you that you have to get rid of in order to make the world a better place? Those are really, really, I mean, just very difficult questions, but they are certainly the ones that I'm asking, and two, and I don't have the answers to these things, I should say also, but I suppose that I feel like it's really important in a very practical way when you read about these incidences with these long-term health consequences, and this company absolutely knew what they were doing, and they knew what it was causing, and they knew that it was making you sick, but they did it anyway. What are we going to do about that? What are we all going to do about that? And those are not easy questions, but it is certainly important to ask them, even if we don't have the answers.
Okay. Would you be willing to give us a clue as to what you're working on now?
I just handed in my next novel. It will be, it's probably about a year out. I think at the moment they have it scheduled for February 2024. It's called Family at the moment. I have written 4 novels entitled 0 novels, so we'll see. But they like this one. They seem happy about this one, so I'm optimistic about it. They're starting to talk covers, which means it's more chance that they're keeping that title than usual. It is about adoption. It is about a movie star who also has unprotected sex in high school, and in fact is pregnant, and places that child for adoption, and then grows up and becomes very famous and adopts 2 children, and and the family stuff that ensues. So it's about a big family, and an unusual family, and it is also about like arting while mothering. As you can see, I haven't talked about this one yet, so I'm not very good at it yet, but I will get better between now and next year, and then we can do this again. It's about that. It's about those things too.
Sounds good. Is there anything else about 1, 2, 3 that you like to talk about that we haven't asked about today?
No, you did a super job. All of the super questions, absolutely. Although I'm happy to answer, whatever other questions people have, for sure.
So I see one question here. How did River redeem himself? Was that by providing the girls with the college catalog?
Yeah. That he at the end, I think Mab thinks, Mirabelle thinks, I don't know, maybe we don't, but Mab and Mirabelle both certainly think that he is going to choose them over his family. And he does not. And they both find this to be, it's an unforgivable and really it's kind of soul-shattering betrayal. But as we were saying before, like, of course he doesn't. Not only because, he is a 16-year-old boy, but he really can't. He can't strike out on his own. He cannot deny his family. This is just not on the table for him. And I think that if they don't know it, we probably do, or at least we're less surprised when it happens. But he does what he can do, which is that he has this piece of information and the proof that they need and that has eluded them, and he knows it, and so he gives it to them. And one of the things so that's the first answer to that question. He gives it to them, and in so doing, redeems himself at least a little bit. To my mind, though, what's really redemptive for him there is that he knows they'll figure it out for themselves. That if he gives them, he doesn't need to hand it to them. He just needs to point them in the right direction. Like they don't have this piece of information, but if they did, they could put it together themselves. And so they enter this thing with him like they're gonna ask him the right questions, and he's gonna tell them the right answers and all of these things, and none of that is what happens. But he knows that they are so smart and so strong and so capable that all he has to do is give them this teeny little detail, and they'll figure it out for themselves, and they do.
Yeah. Okay. there any other questions out there from those of you? Oh, here's one. Okay. Are you familiar with any real life success stories where towns impacted by chemical contamination have been able to get some recourse from the companies responsible?
Yeah, it depends on what you mean by successful. There's a lot of settling out of court, is kind of the short answer. And those settlements are often large enough to make a difference to individual citizens. They are not large enough, by and large, to make a difference to these corporations, which unfortunately makes it a cost of doing business, and and a reasonable cost of doing business, which is to say it is literally cheaper, and usually quite a bit cheaper, to pay out even these things that we read as like, oh, these are, many hundreds of millions of dollars. It sounds like a lot of money. Turns out to be quite a bit less than these companies are making manufacturing, these various and sundry products that my publisher has asked me not to name for fear of getting sued. But I think you know what they are, some of them, at least the big ones. And so yes, it is also true that sometimes they get phased out, these products, and replaced with different products which purport to have solved the problems. Have they? I don't know the answer to that question. I surely would not bet on it, and don't bet on it. That is, I did not get rid of my old nonstick pans and replace them with new nonstick pans. I decided to live my life without nonstick pans. And so success is a hard thing to pin down, I think, in this case, which is also by design.
Okay. Okay, another question. We've not really talked about Russell the attorney. Can you tell us more about your thinking in developing his character?
Yes, I sure can. That chapter is the one thing that remains almost unchanged in the book from the first time I read it, which is strange. Because, and in part that's because it doesn't reach tentacles into very much else. It's a fairly contained thing. So I can, so that doing things like changing from photography to magic was all over the book, whereas he's fairly contained and so, isn't necessarily. He is one of the very few characters we get from outside who give us this sense of what it is like in the rest of the world. He is very much on their side and clearly a really good guy, but also absolutely at the limits of what he can do, which again, as I say, because this like legal route is held out to us as the thing that is going to keep everybody honest and fair and protected. It seemed really important to me to look at the ways in which that is true and the ways in which it is not. He and Nora are clearly doing extraordinary work, and it is also clearly not enough. And so I wanted to look at, at both sides of that. It is also true that he then has goes forth sometime in the middle of his story and though we get it all at once, and has this kid who also has a disability. And, and of course that is true. And that too is both used as legal justification. You can't prove that this water did this because there are kids all over the world who are born with, various and sundry disabilities, which of course is true. And the difficulty of these causal links and thinking about when they matter and when they don't and why. So he allows us to do all of those things.
Okay. Okay. East Palestine is in the news. The town is being told that the air and water are fine, yet the pictures give a lie to that scenario. What do you think?
Yes, I do. Correct. Yeah, agreed. 100% agreed. Yeah. And one of the things that really puzzles me, let's go with puzzles, is any notion that answer is available right now, one way or the other way, that you can know on day one whether something is safe or has been taken care of, the problem has been neutralized. Oh, don't worry about that. Everything is fine. It seems insane to me. And I mean that in a very literal way. Like, it makes you feel like you are crazy because these two things that cannot both be true are being told to you as if they absolutely are. it is, as I say, sometimes it is obvious. And in those cases, it is enraging. And I think that this is true all over the place, all of the time.
You mentioned that the girls needed to work together to make things happen, but at the end, it seems they are all going their own way. That would be in the ending, I guess.
I see.
How do you think they will survive?
Yeah, well, right. Super question. And again, one I think that we are always asking of families in general. Families are really interesting because, as I say, not always, but often you spend, let's go with the first 20 years of your life with these people, and then are expected to just go forth and, and do without them. And in a very, daily way. You become who you are with your family, with these people, and then, frequently enough, you leave them, and to greater and lesser extents, and that is really, and that is really interesting. And to some extent, it is certainly part of, of becoming an adult. I certainly imagine that these girls will be close forever, but I also think that they imagine themselves more isolated than they are. They think that they live in this tiny town from which there is no escape and which has damaged them beyond redemption. And I think that this is true of 98% of 16-year-olds in the world. Think like, here I am, and this is the only way I will ever be, and I will never get out. And and I will always be marked by these people in this place. And it's not that that's not true, but of course, most people do go forth and do something else. And these girls are no exception. There's nothing standing in the way of them, going forth and doing very nearly anything. And because they're very bright and they're very motivated and passionate. And Nora has raised them to do exactly that. And so I'm very hopeful for them. And and that is heartbreaking in that it involves splitting them up. And that is, the human condition, I guess.
Yes, very true. Okay, that seems to be all the questions we have. Anybody else out there have one?
Yeah, anybody else out there? I'll tell you anything you want to know.
What's your best soup? I can ask that.
Oh gosh. Well, see, now that's also a really hard question. The one I make most often is lentil soup, a variety of lentil soups. I probably make some kind of lentil soup every other week because it's very good for you. So when you have small people in your house to feed, it's nice to stuff them with like fiber and kale and stuff. But then every other week I make all of the other different kinds of soups, and often the kind of soup that is whatever is in my refrigerator that I haven't eaten yet.
Okay. All right. Well, if that's all for questions, then thank you so much for joining us. And we love the book, and we'll look forward to your next book a year or so from now.
Thank you. Thank you for doing this. This programming is just, it's incredible. I've been watching you all from afar, and it is really incredible. You're doing really amazing work, and I appreciate so much everybody reading the book and talking about it, and going on this journey with me. I'm gratified and honored.
And on that note, all of you who are watching who live in Wauwatosa, still more events coming up. So check the website or your brochure and join us. Lots more to come. Okay.
Awesome.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.